for joining us for the second webinar in our series. This one is entitled Crisis Response with MTSS in Mind. My name is Dr. Peg Donohue. I'm an associate professor, counselor education at Central Connecticut State University. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I'm grateful for all of the work that school counselors are doing at this challenging time. And I am so grateful for the courage and dedication of our healthcare workers, our first responders, our retail workers. We're just really surrounded with so many people that are working so hard right now. I'm also very grateful to be part of this team of school counselor educators that have all we've all implemented MTSS as school counselors and then moved into our role as school counselor educators and really worked together for the last 5 years or so, working on publications and some research and webinars about the intersection of MTSS and school counseling. So I'm very thankful for my colleagues, Jake, Emily, and Jen. So they're going to be doing other webinars in the series. You may have already caught Jake and Emily's webinar previously. The other webinars in the series are utilizing MTSS in your virtual school counseling program. And also we'll be talking about addressing grief with MTSS in mind, and then addressing or returning to school with MTSS in mind as Jen does the last of our 4 webinars. So what is MTSS? You know, I like to think about it as a way of organizing to get a very large task done in an effective and efficient manner. So sometimes our largest tasks as school counselors can feel overwhelming. This is one of those times where we feel kind of overwhelmed when we have a crisis. So MTSS is really this overarching term that helps us think about prevention and intervention and planning in a systemic way. It's often sort of the combination of RTI, response to intervention, and PBIS. So we think about it that way. And you know, the graphic on the left shows us that MTSS really gets us thinking about the whole child and equity for all. So how do we meet all children's needs in an academic, social, emotional, and behavioral way? This is a graphic that we use in our trainings where we help folks think about the kinds of things we're doing for some of our students on Tier 1, or for all of our students in Tier 1, some of our students on Tier 2, and the students with the most intensive needs on Tier 3. So this is intentionally blank as we think about places we could fill in. How are we addressing crisis on those 3 tiers? And this is aligned with the Ask a National model. You can see in this slide, this was our first infographic that we put together, looking at the 2019 Ask a National model and how it aligns with MTSS. So when we're in business as usual, the Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 things that we already do as school counselors fit in well to the 3 tiers. So this slide kind of sums up what we're going to talk about in this short webinar. We are in the midst of a unprecedented crisis because of the outbreak of COVID-19. And it calls for us to change the way we're working because we're working virtually with our students. It calls for us to change the way we're thinking. We're in a collective crisis. No one is free from this crisis. So we're all experiencing a level of anxiety. And this collective anxiety makes it really challenging to do the work of school counselors without support, without good practices, and without really thinking through our process. So we really are experiencing the collective anxiety that calls us to work differently. And we know that our school communities are experiencing, and we're experiencing, a collective trauma. We have losses of all kinds right now, loss of normalcy, maybe sense of safety. So we are experiencing a collective trauma, which means we have collective grief. We are all experiencing grief at this time. And our hope for these webinars is that we can help point us all in the direction of collective healing. So we'll be talking about the things that are on this triangle in Tier 1, working with a crisis team and teaching our students healthy coping strategies, helping them have regular contact with caring adults, and really doing regular needs assessments to drive the interventions that we're doing from a distance right now. On tier 2, we're going to be working with small groups through the crisis, giving it regular support, maybe doing some targeted psychoeducation that can help kids. On tier 3, we're working with maybe more one-on-one counseling, assessment, risk assessments, getting support to families, and referring to resources that we already work with or new resources. I like this graphic because it also gets us thinking about having continuous parent communication, continuous collaboration to solve problems. And I know that's happening. I've been so impressed with all the school counselors that I've been coming in contact with since the outbreak began. They're really working together well. So what makes this crisis different from other crises we've experienced? If you look at the books on the left, it creates a pyramid where, there's usually a beginning to a crisis, there's a heightened point in the middle, and then there's an ending. This crisis is really different because we don't really have a clear beginning or ending. In fact, we're all living with the uncertainty of when will it end? Usually in a crisis, there's a clear population, those folks that were direct victims, those that are survivors, and their families and friends. In this situation, we're all in it. We're all experiencing it to different degrees, understandably, but we're all experiencing it. So we usually know who's having acute stress and potential traumatic stress, and we're usually with our students. Our students are coming down to our office telling us, hey, I'm worried about this friend or that friend. So when we have more typical crises like a natural disaster, man-made disasters, things that we experience unfortunately in schools all too often. But this is really different. We can't predict what's going to happen. We're all feeling a sense of vulnerability. And some of our regions are experiencing this in very intense ways and having multiple family members that are experiencing the crisis in very direct ways. So we think about, as we approach crisis, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that sense of safety. And try as we may right now, we can't really promise safety to anybody. So I'm in debt to my good friend Gabe Lobus for this wonderful slide and this concept of what makes this crisis different. So if we think about that hierarchy of need, that sense of safety, the psychological needs that we have right now for tier 1, it's really important that we're thinking about what can we do to spread a sense of calm. Calm can be infectious too. So we have to think about having that sense of calm and what helps us to have that sense of calm. So how can we do that for everybody? Well, we know that all kids need, and I would say all adults need, connections with caring people. So the kids need connections with caring adults. And every school has had to figure out their own approach to how we're interacting with students. But I do know kids are craving that contact with adults. Our kids need connection with peers. We have to do it at a distance right now, but the older kids get, the more they need that contact with peers, just like they need food and water and air. They're in that identity development process, and we find our identity through others, through talking to others, being in a relationship. So they're really struggling not having that connection. Like we saw on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs triangle, we need our basic needs: food, water, shelter, clothing. So getting that to families that are experiencing financial loss right now is so important. We really need support expressing our emotional response in crisis. So throughout this process, doing those check-ins, some schools are reactivating or activating their advisory programs over Zoom type calls, and that's so important. Just having a place to say, how are you doing? And I know that a lot of school counselors are doing this final thing. They're teaching easy, accessible coping strategies through all sorts of creative ways, through quick videos, through school counseling lessons, sharing them with teachers. I've seen some really exciting and positive things. So on tier 1, we're going to be talking about the importance of having our crisis team gathering, talking about what's happening now and what we anticipate. We're networking with our local stakeholders, all those great people that we meet with on a regular basis and we refer to, getting them involved in our conversations. We're doing regular check-ins through a Google form. I really think like every 10 days to 14 days, we should be doing a quick needs assessment for kids, sending something out to parents who needs follow-up, and really collecting that data and looking at that shift over time. The longer this goes on, the more kids are going to need follow-up and specific support. So in Tier 1, we're sharing information, we're sharing our clear communication, we're being very clear about confidentiality, and we're reassuring kids that when we come back, we will be coming back, and teaching those important strategies for remaining calm and thinking through things. So we're sharing information for parents. There's an avalanche of information. These are just a couple of examples of how to talk to kids about it and keep the anxiety level down. So those are important things that we're doing on the Tier 1 level. We shared this in the last webinar, but it was worth sharing again. Jamie Wiss from Virginia did a great job putting together a kid-friendly student check-in where they could show what their mood was and how they're doing with schoolwork, and just having a place to ask for support. I really enjoyed seeing this. Malaka Garib was responding to an NPR piece about talking to kids about coronavirus. So she did this amazing comic, and you can link to the whole thing here or search it on Google. But really giving kids a chance to sort of think through and what make sense of what they're hearing. So I really liked that. Again, developmentally appropriate ways to talk to kids about what's going on. On Tier 1, we're talking about anxiety and naming what anxiety is and what it looks like and how it looks different for everyone. And in my travels in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about anxiety and thinking about a friend helped me sort of think about anxiety as things that make us feel fractured or in pieces. So sort of falling apart in that sense. And things that sort of keep us up at night, prevent us from concentrating, maybe having somatic illnesses or manifestations of it, and really having a hard time with that with the uncertainty, having intolerance of uncertainty. So what's the antithesis of anxiety? Well, taking action makes us feel more binded and more together and more whole. So teaching kids specific coping skills. I love this infographic or graphic about self-soothing and distracting ourselves, which is a really good thing to do, and taking action, doing something for someone else is really important. Being aware of our emotions, practicing mindfulness, and having a plan. A lot of families had to sit down and have a challenging conversation. If somebody in our family gets sick, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to stay away from the virus, stay healthy. So, having all of those things are really important, and explaining that on terms that the students we work with can understand. So I think we need to keep in mind on Tier 1 that everything that we're doing is really helping our students, our faculty remember that crisis is opportunity. The Chinese terms for danger and opportunity are actually similar when you look at them. And so there's an opening amidst a crisis for an opportunity to learn some new coping strategies, to build a sense of community despite social distancing, to learn new things, to learn new approaches, and to figure out sort of what we're made of in this process, and being what my daughter used to like to call being super brave in situations. So we do have opportunities here to support everyone in Tier 1. I want to talk a little bit about what our crisis teams are probably very much in the process of already doing. There probably won't be a lot of new things here, but we wanted to address the role of the team because the better we are together right now, the better we are for our kids. So most teams have probably determined a risk assessment protocol so that we know how to support the students that are in distress. It's always a good idea to address the needs of a student who's very heightened as a team. So one person can stay in conversation with the student, the other person can make sure we're getting the appropriate supports, just like you do when we're at school. We'd always call 911 if we believe a student is at immediate risk. And we're working with our local law enforcement or other agencies to conduct those welfare checks on students and families given all of the social distancing mandates. So who can get to the student in person? We're developing a plan for informing our school community members about COVID-19 cases. I know my community um, um, police department is giving us information nightly, which is really helpful. And our school is sending out emails that are really helpful. They're in English and Spanish, which are languages represented in my community. I know lots of teams have already prepared handouts, announcements ahead of time, so that if crisis or loss is experienced in the community, those are ready to go. Some other ideas, I know some teams are putting their referral forms and other relevant documents into electronic formats and showing staff where to find them if they haven't already been digitized in the past. Um, all school crisis teams have a plan of who's going to speak to the media um, and the response that the school's having. In most cases, that's the superintendent. We're using secure online platforms for school counselors and crisis teams to communicate with students and families, so we don't have breaches of confidentiality. So all schools are making those critical choices. We determine also how the school-based mental health team will support students most impacted. So when we get talking about tier 2, how are we identifying those that have the highest needs? So tier 2 and tier 3. I guess the last thing I want to say, for the school crisis teams is to really employ the buddy system. So if you remember the last time you went on a field trip or planned a field trip, everybody had a buddy. So we can employ that idea with maybe thinking about a buddy system for districts. You already have current collaborations with mental health agencies and others. Really employing those alliances. When we look at a map of our current state that we're in, we can see areas, maybe more urban areas that are having higher impact because they're more densely populated, and then seeing more suburban or rural areas that are less impacted. This is a really good time for school counselors to help each other. If we're setting up virtual grief counseling, drop-in rooms, etc., we can really help each other out if we're in a less impacted district. So we're trying to do that in my state. We have to, teachers are already so good at having a buddy system. They're reaching out to one another, they're helping. But if we have new faculty or faculty that don't have a lot of social connection, it's a really good time for teachers to be helping out each other. They're missing their students. They're missing the experience of being at school. So, and when we have a crisis, it's really important for everybody to have someone to debrief with. Um, we think that it's a good idea for us to also employ the buddy system for families. Being able to lean on another family in our community is so important at this time. And we might have families that are new to our communities. Maybe there's language barriers. How do we make sure everybody's kind of buddied up and we're aware of what everyone needs? So I think that's an important idea. And then we always encourage the buddy system for students. I know in my work as a school counselor, most of the time, I heard about kids in distress from their friends. And, in this technological social distancing approach at this point, kids are on social media. So when they're not hearing back from a friend through Snapchat or Instagram, or kids are putting a message up about leave them alone on social media, we really can be very intentional telling kids, hey, watch out for your friends right now, just like we do when we're in school in regular session. So we want to make sure we have those pathways open for kids to reach out to a counselor and say, hey, I'm a little worried about so-and-so. And then we also need to encourage students to talk to a caring adult, somebody at home, people they have connection with, encouraging them to FaceTime with an adult when they're having a hard time if there isn't somebody in their home. So what can we do for groups of students under these conditions? Um, well, starting from the bottom of this page, really meeting with them in small groups. I know some school counselors are doing regular drop-in times, some are doing structured groups. So that's a really good thing for us to be thinking about. And so thinking about the outside agencies that might be providing resources for smaller groups. Consulting and collaborating with families is so important. Having again that pathway for parents to reach out and say, I'm kind of worried about my student, about my child, and then consulting with our whole student support team, meeting with teams of teachers. I know the first um, uh, job really has been to engage students that are not engaged, and why aren't they engaged? I know school counselors have been super busy doing that kind of work. So some examples of tier two things we might do, filling out this Google form, doing a Google Hangout with a counselor, this picture on the bottom left corner, having contact with a parent, maybe doing a video chat with a parent and a student, running a parent group, having parents kind of help each other out and facilitating that can be really helpful. And taking those small groups we were already doing and bringing them online. That helps us to have some continuity. And it's really important to do that progress monitoring and collect some data, asking kids the same questions before a group starts, in the middle of it, at the end, did you get what you needed from this group? All of that data that we collect right now um, helps us to plan our return to school, looking at the kinds of concerns people came forward with, the frequency with which people came forward, super important for us on tier two. So when we think about tier three and crisis, we think about families that are experiencing significant loss, separation. We have many families who have one or both parents that work in the medical field. So we know that separation from parents, long-term, short-term, is really distressing for kids. For whatever reason, a parent is separated. We know there are some families that are experiencing dysfunction right now, that maybe some serious levels of discord or abuse and neglect. We don't have those regular eyes on our students. So, referrals are down, but we know incidents might actually be up. And we think about families experiencing, chaos and uh, challenges when we look at family members living apart from us in other regions of the country. So this is an unprecedented crisis that we're all experiencing, and so we could see pretty intensive needs for many of our students and some of our staff, for sure. So we can think about crisis counseling, again, approaching it as a pair, making sure that we are meeting the immediate needs of students and our staff, making sure we're encouraging care for the caregivers. Some of our students are actually being put in positions of being caregivers for parents who are ill, parents who are absent, grandparents that might live with them. So it's really important for us to think about the caregivers and who's playing caregiving roles right now. We're coordinating with those outside referrals, and all of these agencies are figuring out how to do telehealth and how to support at a distance. And then we're meeting to do problem solving with parents and families. So having those team meetings, IEPs have moved online, 504 meetings, but having a parent meeting about a family or student in crisis is super important on tier three. I think we've mentioned working in pairs, keeping the student on the line. Um, after a crisis, we want to do those regular check-ins, letting kids know, like, you seem like you're in a better spot. I'm going to call you again in 2 days and see how you're doing. Every time we're reaching out, we're posting crisis lines that are local. These are some national crisis lines, putting them maybe in the signature of our emails so that kids always know where to find it, putting it on the face page of our websites. Things like that can be easy to do and super helpful at this time. So thinking about the opportunities to develop our resources and develop our websites is super important. And again, keeping that data so we know um, what were the concerns people brought forward, how did we address them, what could we do differently if we have a similar situation in the future, what systems worked really well right now, what practices were super effective, and what evidence-based practices were we using. So as we come to a close, looking at your system and all the good things you already had in place prior to the beginning of March, and what are you building on now? What are the things that you're finding helpful to add? It's an evolving situation. Things don't look the same today as they did 2 weeks ago. Things won't look the same in 2 weeks from now. So we have a constantly evolving situation, which means we need to be doing regular needs assessments. What is the role that the school counselor is playing on tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? How's that shifting over time? What evidence-based practices do we already use, and how can we utilize them differently? What new ones do we need to adopt? And in this avalanche of resources coming our way, what are the credible sources? So our final thoughts is to make sure you're doing something, some sort of self-care every day, knowing that we can't pour from an empty cup, that we're working in teams, we're consulting and collaborating, we're considering our ethical responsibilities and the policies that we need to abide by from our state, our school, district, and our key administrators, and then looking for other resources. A resource we developed was to create an infographic for each one of these brief webinars. So you could send that to your team and say, what do you guys think about some of these ideas? And hopefully those are helpful. And then some of the resources that I looked at to develop this presentation are on this slide. The Center for School Crisis and Bereavement is excellent. It has a brief 25-minute webinar for educators, which I really liked. We want to thank you for taking time to watch this webinar. Hopefully the other webinars in this series will be helpful to you as well. You can stay in touch with us on School Counselors for MTSS, our website, our Twitter, and our Facebook. And I thank you so much for being part of this process, and hopefully you'll check out our upcoming webinars. Thank you so much, and you're on my heart. I'm thinking about everybody, and we know that we're all going to get through this together. Thank you.